with the fourth segment, which is going to focus a little bit about some of Shaq's comments regarding Bol Bol, who is one of the tall players on the Phoenix Suns. He's not Kevin Durant, but he does play power forward sometimes. He is 7'2". He's very tall, very lanky, a fan favorite. He has a similar slim build to Kevin Durant, and his play style is a little bit similar in the sense that he is a tall player who plays like a guard. Because of the play style and his height, it makes him very unique, and a lot of players are drawn to that uniqueness. A lot of fans that are like hardcore basketball fans tend to call him an IRL, my career player, which is a reference to NBA 2K, where you can make your own player build in the game. And one of the popular ones you can make is a tall power forward who can do everything offensively and everything defensively, which is essentially what Victor Wembanyama and Bol Bol are, both, like, in essence. Because when you look at their player builds, like, they should be able to do everything. Because, like, you look at Bol Bol's highlight reels, you look at Victor Wembanyama's highlight reels, like, they can do everything, and you see that they can do everything. So it's almost as if like they're not real, which is why it's used as like a video game reference. It's a popular phrase that Victor Wembanyama sort of took to a whole different level, because now we have one of these tall alien players, one of these tall players starting for an organization and legitimately getting a bunch more minutes. Like, we usually see these tall guys, but some of these tall guys, they don't really get that much minutes when it comes to actually like playing a lot of these games. Like, they would get minutes, but only to like get praise from the fans and whatnot. Like, it would be garbage time minutes essentially. Like, I don't want to call it garbage time, but that's sadly like that's what it was. Obviously, being 7'4" and being at such a young age definitely impacts the attention you have coming from the media, and depending on the team that you get drafted to, also depends on how much media attention you get, and also how good you are. So, obviously, seeing as Victor Wembanyama was taking the league by storm, it got the attention of Shaq, who is one of the most well-respected centers in the league, top three, arguably top three center of all time. Obviously, Shaq has he likes to have this little beef with centers where he tends to like comment on their game and whatnot, and like always brings up his rings and the fact that he has 3 of them, and whoever he's talking about most likely has less than him. Shaq on the podcast in particular, however, was targeting Bol Bol and saying that Bol Bol can do everything that Victor Wembanyama can do, but even better. Bol Bol is just lazy, is what he said. So, personally, I don't think saying that he's lazy is a good excuse for why someone can do what another player can do, if that makes sense. Like, so why doesn't he play like Victor, despite him, like, why is he lazy? Why does he choose to be lazy? It doesn't make any sense to me why a player who, if he could play better, just chooses to not play better, if that makes sense. I mean, maybe I'm just like talking from the viewer's perspective, because that is technically what Shaq did, considering how he didn't exercise later on in his career, but who knows. Bol Bol on Orlando, in 22 minutes of playing time that he averaged 9 points, 5 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 block, on 55% shooting from the field, 27% shooting from 3, and 76% shooting from the free throw line. Wemby, on the other hand, on 24 minutes, he's averaged 24 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 blocks, on 53, 33, and 84% shooting. So these, apart from field goal percentage, these are all better stats across the board for Victor Wembanyama. They heavily favor Victor, in fact. So it's almost like there's no argument for Bol Bol even being in the same conversation as Victor, just even with all of Bol Bol's experience in the NBA. Like, that's just time he spent in the league. That's not, he didn't necessarily play that many minutes while he was in the league, at least compared to Victor now, getting all the consistent minutes he has and playing behind players like that played the same position as you, like Nikola Jokic and Kevin Durant. It's obviously difficult to get a starting spot, but I mean, like if you aren't good enough to get a starting spot, chances are like you're not good enough. Like there's no way around it. If the coach doesn't think that you're good enough to start, like you're not good enough to start. I don't understand why he's like pushing this narrative that they're like both the same. Like I feel like it's simply because like they're both tall. Even though like they're both tall, that doesn't necessarily mean that they both play the same or they're both the same. It's not true whatsoever. I've been saying it from the beginning of my podcast and from the beginning of my YouTube lives. He is the favorite to win Rookie of the Year, so I'm obviously going to be biased for Victor, but you get minutes in the NBA for a reason. If you aren't getting minutes, it's because you aren't good enough to be playing in those minutes. So, over players that are before you at least. So, it's just that simple. Like, you already have a tall forward, so your competition for Bol Bol is not going to be easy. Victor Wembanyama is going into a system that needed a center, so he definitely gets, like, a lot of help from getting minutes from that, seeing as they were lacking in that position relatively compared to what they're doing now with Victor. Obviously, like, I mean, the team is still lacking, so it's like, I mean, does it really matter that they got the number one pick? We will see in the future, depending on what they can do. If Bol Bol can do what Wemby can do, he would have done it by now. I feel like this is more of an attack on Wemby rather than giving Bol Bol his credit because he hasn't really done much. Like, there's not really much to justify Bol Bol being like that much of a freak of nature just off of height alone. Like, he's a freak of nature just off of height, I get that, but like for NBA standards, being a freak of nature would mean like you'd have to literally like do things that like people either your height or size were unable to do. There's like a lot of what Wemby has done that a lot of people have not been able to do in the league as of right now, and he just started. So it's like a lot of people buy tickets to see him play. You can't really say the same for Bol Bol. Shaq is always tough on these centers like that. Like, you look at tall centers like Rudy Gobert, Shaq cannot stand him because, like, you know, Rudy Gobert ends up getting all the money from all these contracts, and Shaq was a better center than him, and he believes that Rudy Gobert doesn't deserve these contracts, and he deserved to have a lot more money than he did, and it's unfair, which is honestly really funny on Shaq's part because he technically, I feel like he was robbed because, like, he was a better center than Rudy Gobert. It's plain and simple. But regardless of that, he's not difficult on Giannis Antetokounmpo. He's actually really nice about him. He thinks that, like, if there was a player in the NBA that best resembled him and his playing style, Giannis would be him because of how dominant Giannis is in the game and how dominant Shaq was in his game, respectively. So it's no surprise to me why he has such big praise for the big man. And in my opinion, I actually think Giannis should be in the conversation more than Bol Bol as being a freak of nature because, like, Giannis could essentially do what Victor can do except the shooting, which is really where Bol Bol and Victor might get some of the praise, even though Bol Bol shot like 27%, which wasn't really that good. He still was like pulling up for some like decent mid-ranges, which is like stuff that a lot of people like shooting difficult shots like that, like off the dribble, which is something that like a lot of people really like looked forward to when watching Victor. And it really makes sense because like he could just shoot over a lot of defenders. It's honestly hilarious. But he and Jokic, Giannis and Jokic are probably the only big men right now that don't necessarily have a problem with Shaq or don't see like Shaq criticizing them that often. A lot of people on social media agree that Bol Bol being in these talks makes no sense given what he's done, but at the same time they aren't denying that Bol Bol has some game. Chet is another example of one of these crazy like my career players, but he definitely has a case for it. Like, he's averaging a lot better numbers than Bol Bol right now, and he's just as tall as Bol Bol. So why isn't Chet being argued in these talks? Anytime you try to compare like a starter to a role player, in these type of talks, I feel like it's automatically disrespectful because you just can't really compare a starter to like a role player who doesn't get that much minutes. You can't compare what they do in a short amount of time to what someone else does in a broader, much more broad amount of time. You simply can't do that, in my opinion. It's not fair to the athletes. It's not fair to the rest of the players, and especially when like the player that's averaging more minutes is in turn averaging a lot greater numbers. Like you can't compare those two because like he's averaging those minutes for a reason because he can get those numbers. Like you have to take that into consideration. Like you just cannot afford to do that. If that makes I think that makes the most amount of sense in my opinion, but like that's just a simple respect thing for me. So with that, we are out of time with our podcast. That is the end of the fourth segment. Thank you once again for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I am your host, Nelson. Keep in mind to remember to tip and donate. Definitely makes the show much more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. Be sure to tune in to a lot of these games that are coming in, that are going to happen tonight. The Knicks play against the Nuggets in a very highly anticipated matchup. I talked about the matchups before, but I didn't necessarily talk about that one. And the Kings look to get revenge on the Golden State Warriors as they face them in Golden State's home field. So, as I said before, keep an eye out on those games, and as always, take care.